Now, I have neither much experience nor much perseverance in the writing of stories. And I'm thinking here exclusively of ghost stories, because I never cared to try any other kind. And it has amused me sometimes to think of the stories which have crossed my mind from time to time and never properly materialized. Never properly. For some of them I have actually written down, and they repose somewhere in a drawer, to borrow Sir Walter Scott's most frequent quotation, "Look on them again, I dare not." Some of them had ideas in them which refused to blossom in the surroundings that I'd devised for them. Others perhaps came up in other forms in stories that did get as far as print. But let me now recall, for the benefit, so to stylist, someone else, a few of them. Well, there was the story of a man travelling in a train in France. Facing him sat a typical French woman of mature years with the usual moustache and a very confirmed countenance. Now, our traveller had nothing to read but an antiquated novel which he'd bought for the binding. Madame de Liechtenstein, it was called. Tired of looking out of the window and studying his vis-a-vis, he began drowsily turning the pages of this book, and he paused at a conversation between two of the characters. They were discussing an acquaintance, a woman who lived in a largish house at Marcilly-l'Aille. The house was described carefully, and here, we're coming to the point, mention was made of the mysterious disappearance of the woman's husband. Her name was mentioned, and my reader could not help thinking that he knew that name in some other context. Well, just then the train stopped at a country station. The traveller woke with a start from his doze, the book still open in his hand. The woman opposite him got out, and on the label of a bag he read the name that he'd read in his novel. Madame de Liechtenstein. Well, he went on to Troyes, and from there he made several excursions, and one of these took him at lunchtime to, you have guessed, Marcilly-l'Aille. Now, the hotel in the Grand Place faced a three-gabled house of some pretensions, and out of it came a well-dressed woman who he had seen before. Conversation with the waiter. Yes, the lady was a widow, or so it was believed. At any rate, no one knows what has happened to her husband. And there, I'm afraid, I simply broke down. I mean, of course, there was no such conversation in the novel as the traveller thought that he'd read. There was another, quite a long one, this, about two undergraduates spending Christmas in a country house that belonged to one of them. An uncle, next heir to the estate, lived nearby. Plausible and learned Roman priest living with the uncle makes himself agreeable to the young men. Dark walk homes at night after dining with the uncle. Curious disturbances as they pass through the shrubberies. Strange, shapeless tracks in the snow around the house, observed one morning. Efforts to lure away the companion and isolate the proprietor and get him to come out in the dark. Ultimate defeat and death of the priest, upon whom the familiar, balked of another victim, turns. Now, there was also the story of two students of King's College in the 16th century who were in fact expelled thence for magical practices, and their nocturnal expedition to a witch at Fenstanton, and how at the turning to Lulworth on the Huntingdon Road they met a company leading an unwilling figure whom they seemed to know, and of how on arriving at Fenstanton they learned of the witch's death and of what they saw seated upon her freshly dug grave. Now, these were some of the tales which got as far as the stage of being written down, at least in part. There were others that flitted across the mind from time to time, but never really took any definite shape. The man, for instance, naturally a man with something on his mind, who sitting in his study one evening is startled by a slight sound. He turns hastily, and he sees a certain dead face looking out from behind the window curtains. A dead face, but with living eyes. Well, he makes a dash at the curtains, he tears them apart. A pasteboard mask falls to the floor, but there was no one there, and the eyes of the mask are but eye holes. Ah, you see? What was to be done about that? Then there is the touch on the shoulder that comes when you're walking quickly homewards in the dark hours, full of anticipation of the warm room and the bright fire. And when you pull up startled, what face or no face do you see? Or similarly, when Mr. Badman had decided to settle the hash of Mr. Goodman and had picked out just the right thicket by the roadside from which to fire at him, how came it exactly that when Mr. Goodman and his unexpected friend actually did pass, they found Mr. Badman weltering in the road? He was able to tell them something of what he'd found waiting for him, even beckoning to him in the thicket, enough to prevent them from looking into it themselves. You see, there were possibilities, I felt, with all of these, but the labour of constructing the proper settings always proved beyond me. There were possibilities too, I've always thought, in the Christmas cracker. If the right people pull it, and if the motto that they find inside has the right message on it. They will probably leave the party early, pleading indisposition, but very likely a previous engagement of long standing would be the more truthful answer. Now, in parenthesis, many common objects may be made the vehicles of retribution, and where retribution is not called for, at least of malice. Be careful how you handle a packet that you pick up in the carriage drive, particularly if it contains nail parings and hair. Do not, in any case, bring it into the house. It may not be alone. Late on Monday night, a toad entered my study. And although nothing yet has happened that has seemed to link itself with this appearance, I do not think it quite prudent to brood over topics which might open the interior eye to the presence of more formidable visitants. Enough said.